Welcome everyone. My name is Annabelle Dick. I'm the Communications and Engagement Lead at Brandon Capital Partners. Welcome to this information session and Q&A on CUREator, the National Biotech Incubator run by Brandon Capital's MRCF. This incubator is underpinned by MRCF funding as well. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land, Aboriginal peoples and Tory Island Strait peoples. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge those whose land we are presenting on today here in Victoria, the Wurundjeri people and those of the Kulin Nation. So on this webinar today, we have Simon Wilkins. He is the Head of Operations for CUREator. He joins us from the University of Melbourne prior to this role. So Simon, there he was the co-founder of the Translating Research at Melbourne program, which was designed to provide entrepreneurial and business skills to researchers at the University of Melbourne. We also have Amanda Baselja, and she is an analyst with CUREator. So prior to joining us here at Brandon, the CUREator team, she was a clinical scientist at Q Oncology, which was a investee company of Brandon's. And there she led a lot of the strategic planning and implementation of clinical and R&D activities. So just a bit of housekeeping for today. We'll start off with a presentation from the team. We'll be running a few polls as well, just to gauge your interest and your feedback on certain topics. And towards the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So we urge you all to use the Q&A function to submit questions you have, but perhaps wait until the end of the session. Maybe some of the questions you have are answered throughout the presentation. After this, we plan to answer a lot of the questions and provide the FAQ on our website. So if your questions aren't answered today, hopefully they're answered there or via one-on-one direct feedback, which we can get to you. So without further ado, I will pass over to Simon and Amanda.
Thanks, Annabelle. I think it's with me to kick off. So let's move away from the headshots and get straight to the point of the matter. I guess we wanted to really start with a poll to really understand, I guess, the translational barriers that people see in their own research. So thank you to all of you who've joined the call. So we'll put that up on the screen now, I believe. And this is a chance for you to sort of share with us where I think you see the biggest barrier to your own research commercialization. So we'll aim to give you a minute just to get that up and running. And I think it'll also help us to understand where people are up to in their own commercialization journey. And I believe we've got over 300 registrations for the event today. So I'll wait till we get to at least 150 of you filling in the poll before we aim to shut it down. But I think if you can see from the options that we've put here on the slide, these are based on traditional kind of metrics of where the real challenges and bottlenecks are around research commercialization. And I guess it won't come as much of a surprise if we close that poll in 10 seconds from now, that you'll see that one of the biggest barriers for researchers on that journey to commercialization turns out to be, surprise, surprise. Annabelle, would you like to share the results around funding and investment? So I think that kind of speaks really to the genesis of the CUREator as a model and the raison d'etre for what we're trying to do today. So it's great that people have kind of confirmed that. I think I can just click on the stop sharing. Have those results been shared? Hopefully people can see them. And I think, again, we tried to constrain you to a single choice, and no doubt for many people, it's more than one of these. And I think we're very cognizant of these as part of thinking about what the CUREator will do. Moving on though, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. This also speaks to why we're thinking about CUREator and how it fits in with both the role of Brandon Capital and MRCF, and connecting that up with the schemes that are being run by the Medical Research Future Fund to support researchers in this space across a whole range of different parts of the sector. So let's start there. I think hopefully nothing on this slide comes as a shock to anyone that's on the call. But if you think about the Australian context, we're internationally renowned for being globally competitive when it comes to science and research generally, being innovators, for being great at the clinical trial space as well. But when it comes to actual translation success, when we're successful, it goes really well. But we haven't necessarily got as many shots on goal as we might like. And again, this comes back to the poll that we just ran, that we see a lot of people seeing that there are barriers to getting access to funding. In many cases, that results in a lot of startups listing on the ASX to attract funding as soon as possible, possibly too early in some cases. And so when you look at things like the ASX, there's a very large and diverse pool of very small SMEs, so small to medium enterprises that are on the small end of SME. And again, this also ties in with this idea of a very early valley of death that is too late for funding from traditional research sources, but too early for venture capital, even in many cases for Brandon. And so I'll just jump out from talking about the slides for a second, because I've seen that people have been asking about whether these slides will be available after the presentation. The short answer is yes, and also the recording as well. But moving back into the slides, the Brandon Capital experience aligns with this very closely. So from being founded 13 years ago and being focused extensively on early stage investment, Brandon to date has invested in over 40 biotechnology companies. And historically, the run rate for success from the number of opportunities seen to investment runs at about 100 opportunities for investments by Brandon. And it's not that necessarily all of those projects, the 96 out of 100 don't have merit or aren't based on great science. It's simply that they're often too early to be able to attract investment. And that's what CUREator is here to solve. If you look at Brandon Capital's funds under management, the MRCF fund represents approximately $700 million in funding across a number of different funds. Some of those funds, along with other funds managed by Brandon, are already fully invested, which means that it's not possible to get further investment out of them. But there are some active funds. So the BTF scheme invests in clinical stage investments and is still open for investments, was opened in 2017. And MRCF5 is a more traditional preclinical through to clinical stage investment fund that's still open and accepting investment opportunities for investment. Throwing this into the mix with CUREator, what we have is an MRFF grant that is based on providing streams of funding to support preclinical and clinical investments with $40 million or up to $40 million in funding from the grant scheme that can then lead into investment from those funds and also from other sources around Australia. A little bit of background around how this came about. The MRFF ran a program called STAC, or Early Stage Translation and Commercialisation Grant Scheme. There were 4 streams that were announced, and the mission for that funding, which is sort of $80 million in funding across those 4 streams, was to provide funding to support early stage health and medical research innovation here in Australia through to proof of concept and beyond. And so it's really focused on commercialisation opportunities and achieving commercialisation outcomes. And the focus for those 4 streams becomes particularly relevant when we're talking about the CUREator, because streams 1 and 2 are the focus of activity for CUREator, because Brandon was successful in getting that funding awarded. And that's been the basis for the genesis of CUREator as a national biotech incubator. So I've given away my own punchline here, but yes, the MRCF was successful in winning both streams 1 and stream 2. And I think within that, it's really important to understand that stream 1 is very, very broad. So preclinical medical research or medical innovation projects with commercial potential can now access funding from this pool of $19.75 million over 3 years. And in addition, stream 2 is for early clinical development of novel drugs, or novel uses for existing drugs, of course, with commercial potential. Same amount of funding, same time period, but with a much more specific focus on drugs and new uses for existing drugs, because streams 3 and 4 are focused on medical devices and digital health. So these 2 streams of funding have been used to sort of drive the formation of CUREator. which, as I said, is on a national stage now. So we've seen some great early press and interest in what we're doing from across the research community and the mainstream media. And we're just really excited to hear about the great projects that might be able to tap into that funding to achieve great outcomes. So this is really our first chance to share with you what we're trying to do and I guess find out who's on that journey with us. So in particular, what are we looking for is a really important question. And so for the preclinical stream, in line with the grant, we're looking for preclinical medical research or medical innovation projects with commercial potential. They really do need to have that potential as part of what they're doing. It's unfortunately not enough to be focused on unmet medical needs. We really need to know that they can be commercially viable. And then we're aiming to fund at least 25 projects over 3 years from that pool of $20 million. And we're expecting projects to have a timeline for use of that funding of 1 to 2 years. So within that 3-year period, all of those 25 projects or more will need to start. They won't need to finish necessarily within that time period, but we are looking for projects that can meet milestones within a 1 to 2 year period. In terms of what we're looking for, it's very much in line with traditional thinking for MRCF investments and Brandon generally, but it's that stage that is much earlier than perhaps we might have been able to go with traditional MRCF investment. So particularly it's about innovative science, the insight that you have, and I guess how highly differentiated that can be compared with the existing approaches, and particularly for biomedical applications. So biotech in agri and food is ineligible there. But I guess equally important with the innovative science and highly differentiated biomedical applications is that you have a clear and achievable plan to achieve it. And in terms of what we'll provide, the aim is to provide grant funding of up to $500,000, so $500,000, along with expertise from across the Brandon and MRCF network, and also from the dedicated CUREator team. Again, this will help to support and guide projects both in their formation and then also in delivery. It's just an important note to make is with this first stream, with the preclinical stream, projects that apply for the full $500,000 will also have the opportunity to apply for additional funding. So up to an additional $500,000. So if you're applying for the full amount for the preclinical stream, there is also the option to identify what you would be able to achieve with $1 million rather than $500,000. And that's over the term of the award, not per year. I've just seen that question come through. Nice try, but yes, it is over the term of the award. And in particular, this is to achieve additional milestones. So it's a really important point that you demonstrate that there are milestones that can be achieved with the initial amount of grant funding, but whether you can go beyond that with additional funding is something that we're definitely keen to hear from applications. And that would then be in addition to being additional milestones, that would then be something that we would look into as part of thinking about which applications get additional funding as part of the selection process. And I guess what we provide in addition to that is very much a funding pathway for successful projects. So the milestones that you identify really do need to reflect a way to find an uptick in terms of investability. And that's something where the Brandon and MRCF team are definitely going to be advising and providing support to ensure that it's moving in that correct direction. So you know that if you're achieving the milestones that are agreed with the team, that you know that you're on track to be able to attract investment at the end of the grant period. In terms of the clinical stream, it's not as many projects, but it's the same pool of funds as was for the preclinical. So again, nearly $20 million. And so the focus here, as I mentioned, is explicitly on clinical development for novel drugs or novel uses for existing drugs. And so we're looking to fund 11 projects at least over the next 3 years in this space. And again, project timelines 1 to 2 years. But this is where projects can access up to $1.5 million in grant funding per project. And in return, what we will provide in addition to that grant funding is the expertise and support of the MRCF network. But also there is the potential for matching capital on a one-to-one basis to be provided by the MRCF. And so this would be an additional up to $1.5 million per project over the course of the grant. And again, this would be coming particularly from the MRCF if that's the choice of the team. It's really important to state that this is a grant. So this is not dilutive funding, or to use the correct term, non-dilutive funding. So specifically, we're looking for a way to advance these projects rather than taking equity up front. The funding that would come from the MRCF is dilutive funding on that previous slide though. So that would be an equity stake for MRCF. In terms of the requirements and key criteria for the grant, we are talking about the grant criteria that were advised by the MRFF. So this is the decision of the MRFF around how the funding scheme is structured. So projects must be for Australian SMEs. So that means projects must be funded to support programs that are conducted in Australia where possible. If there are extenuating circumstances that make that impossible, then we just need to know that. But it does need to be a fair effort in terms of seeking to achieve those projects here in Australia. But equally, and perhaps as importantly, projects must be Australian SMEs, small to medium enterprises, an incorporated proprietary limited company. Now, in practice, applicants must be a company or a company must be established to receive the funding. But if you're not incorporated yet, then we can work with you to ensure that that happens in time for award of the funding. But that means getting your ducks in a row now and having the conversations amongst your team about who's going to be going down the commercial path to ensure that it's not just a shell company, it really does have the ability to take this project forward in a more commercial sense. And I think waiting until award of funding to start that conversation, whether with your BD team within the tech transfer office or amongst yourselves as founders, is leaving it well too late. So I think it's really important to address that, and we're certainly going to have enough applications to deal with that. We need to know that it's definitely within the realm of possibility that the project team can move forward with the project by the time of award. In terms of project monitoring, I think there's been a few questions in the chat that I've just seen coming in. So yes, we're expecting most projects will be 2 years in duration, but we will be expecting milestones to be defined for year one as well. Unfortunately, projects can't be longer. It really is about trying to shift the needle sooner. So we are looking for projects across both the preclinical and the clinical stage that are only up to 2 years. In terms of monitoring performance, the CUREator team will be working very closely with successfully awarded projects to ensure that funding is milestone-based and that funds are allocated to critical path experiments. So unfortunately, that means no capital expenditure on capital equipment, sorry. It's really important that this is advancing the project and not just building new equipment or buying new equipment. We will expect some reporting requirements to be part of that, and there will be a management review committee that will allow those projects to be reviewed. And I guess the question you're all asking is, what are we looking for? Particular therapeutic indications and so forth. I think it's really important to state this is that we're really agnostic on the therapeutic indication. We want to have your sense of what that should look like, but we will also have our own views on how that should work and how we can best advance projects. So it will be a bit of a conversation around the EOI applications that we receive. But again, just to restate what I said before, that in terms of those 4 points around innovative science, being highly differentiated and having a biomedical application, I think you would want to make sure that in submitting an application that you can address these dimensions as follows, that you understand what the science behind the project enables in a clinical or a commercial sense, and I guess how it's distinguished from existing solutions. And I guess beyond the unmet medical need is really what you are able to do and how you can address it. And then I guess in juxtaposition with that is that there's a clear and achievable plan within the time frame of 1 to 2 years for investability to follow on from where those endpoints are for achieving the development plan. To add on to that, particularly for the clinical stream, so that those 4 points are really relevant across all applications. But particularly for the clinical stream, I think we want to see that there's a development program for your drug or new use for that existing drug that you're working on that can demonstrate commercial potential and really shift the needle when it comes to a discrete body of work that's going to take that project forward. In terms of the timeline to apply, the process for applications is already open as we speak. So that opened on the 11th of November and applications will close on the 6th of December at 4 p.m. And I think Amanda will be talking you through how to manage the application process shortly. But really, we're just, as I said before, really excited to sort of hear from all the great opportunities from across the biomedical sector here in Australia. So whether you're an SME, a PhD student, a senior professor at any of the research institutions in and across Australia, get your skates on, get an application in, because as I said, applications will close shortly. We're looking to really move fast here. We want to get started. I think we've had questions in the past already about why the application process is so short. And I think that the point for us is that we want to start. We want to get going with finding these projects. There will be subsequent rounds for people to apply to. We're looking to run another round in the next 6 months. And that will probably be the cadence for applications to be submitted going forward. But we really want to start now. And so we're trying to make sure that this process can start before the end of the year and that we can get projects up and running by mid-2022. It is a longer process than perhaps for a software startup, but I guess that's really appropriate for the level of due diligence and investigation that will happen as part of the process. So for the EOI process, we will endeavour to get back to applicants with a shortlist by the 15th of December. And that's going to go through a preliminary due diligence process and an investment review committee, which will include independents. Those projects that are shortlisted on the 15th will be invited to submit a full application. So they'll have approximately 10 weeks to submit a full application. And this process really aligns with the existing MRCF process. And so I think it's a really important point to make is that even though this is a grant, we're applying that investment lens that Brandon brings to the process so that you'll have great familiarity with how the MRCF process works wherever you come from as part of the process. And so that will include a nationally representative subcommittee of the existing MRCF investment review committee that will then review applications along with the independents for the EOI process. And we'll be looking to select projects recommended for funding at that point. From there, traditional and really valuable, I think it's really important to say that this isn't a hurdle, it's actually a really valuable part of the process. But traditional due diligence and investment confirmation will happen from there. So that's really running sort of from February through to mid-April, including recommendation for projects and then projects being advised of successful outcomes. And it's really at that point that we would want projects to be ready to hit the road. I think if you remember back to that slide showing the 4% of projects that come through, there are a number of projects that do not make it through due diligence or award of funds through the traditional MRCF process. And being ready to hit the ground running is a really important part of making sure that you're ready to go if you are given the nod to say that your project's been successful. Now, it's a really important point with the EOI process, we are expecting and receiving already so many applications that it's just not feasible to provide feedback to unsuccessful applicants. But as I said, the due diligence process for full applications is a mirror for the existing process for MRCF in many ways, although expedited in some ways, but we are really keen to make sure that we're providing constructive feedback to applications at the full application stage, whether they are successful or not. And so yes, unsuccessful applicants at that stage will be provided with feedback. And I guess from there, really, we're looking for projects to commence mid-year in June, July 2022. And so startups and SMEs will be commencing progress towards their year one milestones at that point. And this is also when we would expect the second round for expressions of interest to kick off again, hopefully with a bit more notice and hopefully with a slightly longer review time period for ourselves, just to ensure that we don't fall apart. But I think, as I said, we're just really keen to make sure that this process starts sooner rather than waiting till next year to kick off. So hopefully you indulge us this once, and next time we promise to give you a bit more notice for getting your application in. In terms of how to apply, I'd like to hand you over to our guru when it comes to all things for application management. Amanda's done a fantastic job of building this system very, very well and very, very quickly. So Amanda, it's over to you now to share how that process will work. And I'm sure everyone wants to know how to win at getting their application in and in front of the review committee. So over to you.
Thank you, Simon. And I can see that there are a few questions coming through the chat box, and you may find that they will be addressed as we work through the application process. So to apply to the CUREator for the EOI, it is all done online through this platform here. The website is up there at the top, but for those questions that have come up again, this is recorded and you will have access to the slides as well. So please don't panic if you don't get this down while we're talking. But the website is curator.awardsplatform.com. and you'll end up onto a page like this. So you have the opportunity to register, or if you're returning, to log in. And when you do register, you will receive a confirmation email stating, will you confirm your registration? Please keep an eye out on your junk boxes if you do not see it in your inbox. So when you log in, your homepage will look like this. So this is the CUREator application homepage. You can see there with the red box, and I apologise if this is small on anyone's screen, but you can start your application. So to start your application, you do actually need to confirm your registration. For those who are returning, we've done an example test application here. So if you click on test application, or whatever your application is called, you'll then be able to go back into your application. And I would recommend for those who are really interested in applying that you do register and have a play around with the application, have a look at each of the tabs. So this is where you start. As we mentioned, there are two streams. So there is the preclinical stream and the clinical stream. For the preclinical stream, that's what we've selected here, but you can actually select the clinical one. And this is really important that you make the decision here on what your application is going to be. There are some questions that are only specific to either stream, so please do keep that in mind. So here you also will provide your company name, proposed company name if you're not yet incorporated, or if you haven't even thought of something, the project title is also acceptable. I won't go through every step of the process. As you can see, we have skipped the eligibility and declaration and moved straight on to the applicant information, but we really just want to give you a high level of what the application involves, and of course keeping in mind that I can see there are a lot of questions that we want to give time for as well. So for the applicant information, this is really the person who's preparing the application on behalf of the project or company and has the authority to do so. So once you've done that, you can move on to project overview, and this really gives you a high overview of the project. And so for us to see what we're looking for really is your project title and a few key questions. So I want to reiterate that this is open to any Australian researcher from any institute, any university, or from any small to medium enterprise in Australia. But the first question does ask if you're affiliated member institute of the MRCF. If you do not find that you are, you can select not a member and you'll have the opportunity to select your affiliated university or institute. If you are not affiliated with any of those, then please select other and you'll have the opportunity to state where you're from. We also do ask that you provide the contact details of the business development lead at your organisation. There are a number of other high-level questions here, sort of asking your incorporation stage, therapeutic area, modality, and your IP status. Please answer these as best as possible, but they will not determine your eligibility or not. They're really to get an idea of your application. The project description is really where you get to shine and tell us why you think your project is fantastic and why you want to get CUREator funding to build it and to commercialise it. So as you can see here, we've got a bit of help text as well. I won't go through every question on this page, but all applications that are submitted to CUREator are confidential, but we do request that you don't disclose confidential information in the application. If you need to, then please preface this with confidential, because it is imperative that you can share with us enough technical information to demonstrate the differentiation and novelty of your project. So we'll move on to the next part, which is a continuation of the questions on this page. As I said, you really get to tell us about your project, what experiments you want to do, what stage of development you're at, and why you think you have a competitive edge. And so for this, we're allowing you to submit a maximum 2 A4 page document, which is in PDF with a minimum 10-point font in Arial. And this document should really highlight what are those experiments that got you so excited that you thought, wow, I can actually build this project into something great and commercialize it. And this is why I want funding to do that. So please really carefully consider what information you'd like to include in this. Anything over 2 pages will not be reviewed, and the written component of your entry really should be explained in those text boxes above. The final point is, to us, it's not just about the technology, it's really equally important about your team and who's involved and who's an investor, who holds what position within the company or the project, and how involved are they. So then moving on to the next stage of the application, which is the funding request. So there are a number of questions on this page. You're able to tell us how much funding you're requesting. Please remember that you did select the stream preclinical or clinical at the beginning. So make sure you select funding that is applicable to the stream that you're applying for. And here you really get to tell us what you will do with it, what sort of key experiments you plan to run, how you plan to use the funding as well. So if you need to hire additional people, what consumable costs you'll have, and any other expenses. Finally, there's one more question that's optional, and this is only for the preclinical stream, and that's talking about if you had access to an additional $500,000, what extra milestones and benefits could be achieved with the extra funding. And really, this is your chance to tell us how you would use that money, and based on these EOI applications, we would then invite the successful applicants who have a really great concept and project in mind with that additional funding to then submit a full application for the full amount. The last point is, and I think this is probably an important point to really talk about, is the commercialization plan. Maybe it's something you should really be thinking about first, because it is the end goal. So it's, if your program is successful and you obtain CUREator funding and you're able to do all these wonderful experiments and proof of concept, what would your path forward be? So for further development, translation and commercialization, what companies do you think you could partner with or would acquire this technology? So really thinking about what that end goal is, and then maybe working backwards to where you are now and how can you fill in that gap, and what sort of path do you want to take with CUREator funding. The last step is to review and submit your application. So please review it before submitting. The submit application is down there. Once you do submit, you'll receive an email confirmation that your submission was successful. Like I said earlier, please check your junk inbox as well, just in case it does go missing. You can revise your application once you have submitted it. So say you submit a week early and then you have another idea and you really want to amend your application, you can, only up until the deadline. And that deadline is 4 p.m. At the 6th of December, so not too far away. And the applications will shut at 4 o'clock on the dot. So if you're in the system, you need to make sure it's submitted, otherwise you will miss out and we will not be accepting any late applications. Once this happens, the EOI committee will review all the applications, and then we plan to notify everyone of the outcomes on the 15th of December. So what the last sort of thing with the application looks like is that once you've submitted your application, you're able to download it as a PDF. This is what sort of the front and last page would look like. Obviously, you wouldn't be submitting a blank application, but this is really to give you an idea that you are able to download it, share it with your team as well, and keep it for reference. Finally, I just want to reiterate again that all applications need to be submitted through this online platform. and the link is listed there, and you'll receive the slides so you can follow up. And it's also on our website. The CUREator Assessment Committee, which consists of Brandon Capital delegates and 2 independent members, will review all the EOIs through the platform, and then all applicants will be notified on the outcome with respect to progression to the next stage via email. And this is also all done through the platform. Those successful applicants who will move on to this next stage will be invited to submit a full application, and we'll provide more information in due course. If you do have any issues completing the application, if you do have any specific eligibility questions, we won't answer them today in the Q&A, but please feel free to reach out at info@cureator.com.au. We do request that you don't email us at 3:50 p.m. on Monday the 6th of December trying to get your application completed, because unfortunately we are unable to change the timeline for the deadline. So please get in touch early and we will work with you as best as we can.